March 24, 1945. The Combat Information Center aboard USS Bush glowed with the soft hum of radar screens. Inside the darkened compartment, the air smelled of sweat, coffee, and ozone. The SG surface search radar swept in rhythmic pulses, its phosphorescent arm tracing ghostly arcs across the scope. On the repeater screen, dozens of small echoes flickered, some waves, some death. Radar operator second class James Patterson adjusted the gain knob, narrowing the blur until the contacts came clear. Multiple returns, bearing 340 degrees, range 62 miles, inbound from Kyushu. Commander Roland Westholm leaned over his shoulder. He didn't need binoculars. The war was now fought by men who stared at glowing circles in the dark. Task Force 58 had stretched a ring of radar picket stations around Okinawa, 16 destroyers and gunboats, each an isolated outpost of steel and electronics. They called it the electronic fence. The plan was bold. Nothing in the sky would reach the invasion fleet undetected. Each destroyer sat between 15 and 95 miles from Point Biwalo, alone amid 1,000 square miles of ocean. The radar beams were their eyes, the circuits, their nerves. No one realized yet that this same brilliance would turn them into magnets for death. To the Imperial Japanese Navy, the logic was cruel but simple. One pilot, one plane, one ship. The kamikaze doctrine had evolved from desperation into arithmetic. For every obsolete zero that struck, an American destroyer worth millions was lost. Each pilot was trained not to return. On Kyushu's dusty airfields, young men bowed to photographs of their families before climbing into aircraft painted with cherry blossoms, the emblem of sacrifice. Operation Kikyusui No. 1, floating chrysanthemums, would soon unleash 355 suicide planes and 341 bombers. Their first targets, the radar pickets. Aboard the American pickets, war had become a science. The destroyers were floating laboratories, steel shells filled with electronics. Air search radar swept 60 miles, surface search 15, and height-finding units gauged altitude for intercepting fighters. The Combat Information Center fused these signals into a single tactical map. The Mark 37 fire control radar locked guns onto targets invisible to the naked eye. Mathematics now governed survival. Radar-guided shells could hit 20% of maneuvering targets, 10 times better than unaided human aim. The men inside these compartments were technicians first, warriors second. Lieutenant Howell Charing of LCS L-51, a small landing craft gunboat, summed it up bluntly: the destroyers were bait. Their job was to attract Japanese aircraft away from the main fleet, draw the kamikazes into radar range, and die buying time for the invasion ships. Every sailor knew it, yet they volunteered. In the Combat Information Center of USS Laffey, Commander Frederick Beckton drilled his men relentlessly, radar drills, damage control drills, no rest. They called his ship the ship that would not die. They hadn't yet seen why. By April 1, 1945, the day of the Okinawa landings, the electronic fence was alive. Every 4 seconds, the SC-2 air search radar swept the heavens. Every heartbeat, a pulse crossed the sea. Fighter direction officers in headsets spoke calmly to pilots they couldn't see. Vector 340, Angels 5, bogies inbound. The destroyers were no longer hunters of submarines. They were conductors of an invisible symphony of interception. The age of steel and guns was fading. The age of electrons had begun. For a few brief nights, the Pacific was deceptively peaceful. The men joked in the wardrooms, wrote letters home, smoked under starlight. Below deck, the CIC glowed quietly, radar sweeps tracing their ceaseless circles. But on the northern horizon, unseen in the darkness, hundreds of Japanese aircraft were gathering. The operators at Kyushu's bases had loaded fuel, tightened bolts, and whispered last words. The next time the radar screens brightened, those green echoes would not be practice. They would be the beginning of the largest kamikaze assault in naval history. April 6, 1945. The waters northwest of Okinawa were deceptively still beneath a pale moon. Inside the Combat Information Center aboard USS Bush, the low hum of generators mixed with the rhythmic ping of radar sweeps. At 3 o'clock hours, The SG scope flared, multiple echoes bearing 340 degrees, range 60 miles. Lieutenant Frank Adams removed his headphones and exchanged a look with Commander Westholm. The reports from other picket stations confirmed it. More than 100 contacts inbound from Kyushu. The first wave of Kikusui No. 1 had begun. From the Japanese bases, 355 suicide planes rose into the night sky, escorted by hundreds of bombers. They flew low over the ocean to avoid detection, their engines drumming like an approaching storm. Many pilots were barely 18, their training compressed into a week of flying and a lifetime of belief. Each knew the destination but not the way home. Their instructors had told them, "Trade your life for a warship." The logic was cold and mathematical. If 1 in 6 aircraft struck true, Japan would win through sacrifice. At Station No. 1, USS Bush stood alone amid black waves. The crew had been at battle stations for hours, guns loaded, radar tracking continuously. The SC-2 air search scope lit with hundreds of blips as the enemy formations descended toward wave height. The TBS radio crackled with intercept calls from carrier fighters, but there were too few planes and too many targets. Commander Holm gave the final order. "Anything approaching the picket line is hostile. Fire at 12,000 yards. No check fire." At 1500 hours, the radar scope flashed again. Dozens of fast-moving contacts closed from multiple bearings. The ship's guns opened up, tracer fire streaking into the sky. 2 enemy planes burst into flame and plunged into the sea, but a third broke through the barrage. A Nakajima B-6N torpedo bomber came in low over the waves, engines howling. Moments later, it struck between the 2 stacks on Bush's starboard side. The detonation tore through the forward engine room. Steam screamed from ruptured lines, and 14 men died instantly. Yet the destroyer stayed afloat, still firing. At 1700 hours, USS Colhoun raced in to assist, her hull cutting through burning debris. For Corsair fighters circled above providing cover, but the sky was thick with incoming aircraft. 40 to 50 enemy planes swarmed the 2 destroyers. Colhoun took her first hit at 1730. A Zero slammed into the main deck, followed by 3 more in rapid succession. Commander George Wilson ordered, "Abandon ship." Within minutes, Colhoun rolled and broke apart, disappearing beneath the flaming sea. 35 of her crew were lost. Commander Holm refused to give up. Bush's gunners kept their stations even as fires spread through the engine spaces. At 1725, a second Kamikaze hit the port side between the stacks, nearly splitting the destroyer in 2. 20 minutes later, a third crashed above the main deck and ignited the ammunition stores. The ship was finished. At 1830, USS Bush rolled and slipped beneath the sea, taking 87 men with her. Those who survived floated among oil and fire for 10 hours before rescue. By night's end, 3 destroyers and 2 ammunition ships were gone. 10 more vessels lay damaged, but the main fleet anchored at Higuchi Bay remained untouched. The radar pickets had done what they were built to do, absorb the fury meant for the invasion force. Their losses became numbers in a cold equation. Each destroyer lost meant thousands of troops saved ashore. As the flames faded on the horizon, the survivors understood that technology had not made war cleaner. It had only made sacrifice more precise. April 15, 1945. The destroyer USS Laffey steamed north toward Radar Picket Station No. 1, relieving her sister ship J. William D. Commander Frederick Beckton stood at the plotting table, his face half-lit by the green glow of radar scopes. The Bush and Colhoun were gone, and every man aboard knew it. Yet orders were orders. Laffey would hold the station alone, 70 miles from the main fleet, 30 miles from the nearest support ship. In those lonely waters, courage was measured not in distance traveled, but in how long one could stand and fight. The Laffey bristled with radar arrays, SC-2 air search, SG surface search, SP height finder, and the Mark 37 gun director tied to the Mark 25 fire control radar. Below decks, the Combat Information Center hummed like a machine heart. Operators plotted moving blips with grease pencils on transparent boards, translating radar returns into life-or-death geometry. The destroyer was a floating equation. 336 men, 2,200 tons of steel, 6 5-inch guns, and a mission to see the enemy before the enemy saw them. April 16, 07:27. The radar speakers crackled, single aircraft bearing 0-20 degree, range 11 miles, low altitude. Becton ordered flank speed and hard right rudder. The Val dive bomber appeared from the morning glare, its engine screaming. All starboard guns opened fire, tracers crossing like fiery threads. The aircraft absorbed hit after hit but kept coming. At 500 yards, a 5-inch shell detonated beneath its fuselage. The Val exploded, raining metal into the sea. The bridge fell silent. They all knew that was only the beginning. At 8 o'clock, the radar scopes bloomed. Multiple raids closing fast. 50-plus contacts, separate groups, altitudes diverse. "Here they come," Becton said quietly. Laffey's guns erupted, turning the deck into a roaring machine of steel and flame. 20mm mounts chattered until barrels glowed red. In the first 20 minutes, 8 planes were destroyed by direct fire. Each kill was a reprieve of seconds before the next shadow appeared through smoke. At 8:27 a.m., Judy bomber broke through from astern. Despite dozens of hits, it struck Mount 53 aft. The explosion killed 6 men instantly, igniting ammunition and fuel. The fantail erupted in flame. Within minutes, another Judy smashed into the port quarter, tearing away the deckhouse. Smoke rolled across the ship in thick black clouds. The crew fought fires barehanded, hoses snaking across decks slick with oil and blood. By 9 o'clock, 4 more attackers dived simultaneously from different directions. 2 crashed home, one dropping a bomb that ripped through the machine shop, another smashing near the waterline. Steam pipes burst, electrical power failed, and half the guns switched to manual. The destroyer was burning from bow to stern. Rudder jammed hard left, circling like a wounded animal. Becton's order came through the smoke. "No, I'll never abandon ship as long as a single gun can fire." The bridge crew nodded silently and went back to their stations. A Zero carrying a 550-pound bomb crashed into the forward stack, lifting the bridge off its supports. In the Combat Information Center, lights flickered and died. For 3 minutes, the ship was blind, radar dead, communications severed. Individual gunners fought on instinct, firing at shadows through smoke. One crew, operating manually on Mount 44, spotted a Val diving from 8,000 feet and shot it down with hand-cranked accuracy. Courage had replaced technology, if only for a moment. At 9:47, the 22nd and final Kamikaze appeared, another Val, skimming the waves. Lieutenant Charing's gunboat LCS, L-51 raced to intercept, placing itself between the attacker and Laffey. The plane passed 50 feet overhead, trailing flame, and crashed 100 yards off the bow. The battle was over. In 80 minutes, the Laffey had endured 22 attacks, been hit by 6 planes and 4 bombs, lost 32 dead and 71 wounded. Yet she still floated, guns still manned. The Pacific quieted to the crackle of burning metal. The sea around Laffey was littered with wreckage and floating shell casings. Gunners slumped beside silent mounts, hands blistered and faces blackened. Smoke still rose from the forward stack, but the ship remained alive. Over 8,000 rounds had been fired. 9 enemy planes destroyed by gunfire, 4 more crippled. Against impossible odds, the destroyer had survived what the enemy called 10,000 meters of fire. When the smoke finally cleared, the officers understood what the radar had proven. The machines could see farther and calculate faster, but they still depended on human hands to fight, repair, and endure. The Laffey's radar team had kept tracking solutions even as fire spread through the CIC. The mathematics of battle had merged with the will of men. On that April morning off Okinawa, technology did not replace courage, it amplified it. By early May 1945, the skies over Okinawa had turned into a permanent battlefield. The Japanese had learned from their failures at Kikusui No. 1. Now they came in waves timed with sunrise and dusk, using clouds, rain squalls, and island terrain to mask radar reflections. The radar pickets, those thin destroyers scattered across the sea, had become lightning rods for an entire empire's dying fury. Every man aboard them knew what was coming each morning. The sound of engines, the crackle of radar, and the whine of descending death. At Radar Picket Station 15, the destroyer USS Hugh Hadley joined USS Evans and several support craft. Her Combat Information Center was the nerve hub of the defense grid, tracking, directing, coordinating. Inside, radar operators plotted hundreds of moving dots, each representing a kamikaze somewhere between Kyushu and death. On May 11th, those dots began to converge. 150 aircraft, Zeros, Vals, Judas, and Kates, were inbound from multiple directions. Hadley's radar plot filled with contacts until the screen looked like a storm of locusts. Commander William McCalla and his team turned chaos into coordination. The Hadley CIC managed 6 separate radar plots at once, each linked to the supporting ships and 12 carrier fighters above. The voices on the TBS circuit overlapped. Controllers calling vectors, pilots shouting, "Splash 1 bandit," radar sweeps, altitude estimates, bearing corrections, all happening in real time. This was no longer a naval duel. It was a symphony of electronics. Every decision had to occur within seconds, and every error meant steel, fire, and death. At 8:40, the first kamikaze broke through the fighter screen, a Val dive bomber coming in low and fast. The Hadley's forward guns erupted in synchronized thunder. The aircraft disintegrated 50 yards from the bow, spraying fragments across the deck. But there was no pause. Another followed, then 5 more. In less than 10 minutes, the destroyer's gunners had shot down 10 planes. The smell of cordite and burning paint filled the air. Yet the radar scope still glowed with incoming contacts. Dozens more. The sky had become an ocean of fire. At 9:20, a Zero slammed into the port side just below the bridge. The explosion ripped open the hull, killing 10 men and setting the superstructure ablaze. Minutes later, a second aircraft crashed into the aft deck, detonating its bomb near the after engine room. The Hadley staggered under the impact but stayed afloat. Smoke poured from every hatch, yet the guns kept firing. The gunners had become part of the machinery. Faces blackened, ears bleeding, hands blistered from red-hot steel. They no longer counted attacks. They simply kept shooting until each shape vanished in smoke. Through the chaos, the Hadley's radar team never lost the plot. They continued to guide interceptors, vectoring Corsairs and Hellcats to enemy clusters miles away. Across the radio net, the voices of other picket ships echoed, each one another node in the growing web of electronic defense. Destroyers, escort carriers, and gunboats all shared radar data in real time, forming an invisible shield across hundreds of miles. For the first time in history, a naval fleet fought not as isolated vessels, but as an integrated information network. By noon, the last of the Japanese planes broke off. The sea was littered with wreckage, smoking fuselages, drifting debris, and oil fires stretching across the waves. The Hadley was badly damaged. 28 dead, 67 wounded, decks scorched and twisted. Yet she remained afloat. 23 enemy aircraft had been destroyed by her guns, her radar, and the precision of coordination that made her more machine than ship. For those aboard, it felt like survival by mathematics, not mercy. Commander Melanie later described radar picket duty as the Navy's version of the infantry point man, first to see the enemy, first to be hit. But unlike the point man who could see only a few yards ahead, the radar pickets saw death 50 miles away. They could hear the enemy before they appeared on the horizon. The men who fought these battles were no longer traditional sailors. They were technicians, mathematicians, and warriors of circuitry. They fought in the invisible realm of electrons and echoes. While Japan's pilots were dying faster than they could be trained, America's factories were producing 200 new radar sets every month. The industrial equation had turned absolute. For every kamikaze plane built on Kyushu, the United States built 10 radar-guided guns, 20 shells, and 1 new destroyer. Japan was fighting with courage, America with calculus. The outcome was not merely decided, it was manufactured. While Japan's pilots were dying faster than they could be trained, America's factories were producing 200 new radar sets every month. The industrial equation had turned absolute. For every kamikaze plane built on Kyushu, the United States built 10 radar-guided guns, 20 shells, and 1 new destroyer. Japan was fighting with courage, America with calculus. The outcome was not merely decided, it was manufactured. By late June 1945, the battle for Okinawa had dragged on for 90 days. 90 days of continuous alerts, air raids, and smoke that never left the horizon. The radar pickets had lived through hell. 15 destroyers and minesweepers lay on the seabed. 45 more limped back to port, and nearly 5,000 sailors were dead or wounded. Yet the invasion fleet at Higuchi anchorage still floated. The pickets had fulfilled their grim design, to die so others could land. June 22nd marked the end of organized Japanese resistance on Okinawa. The last gun emplacements fell silent, but out to sea the radar pickets kept scanning. Each rotation of the antenna was a heartbeat of vigilance. On their scopes, echoes of debris sometimes mimicked aircraft. Operators, hollow-eyed from months without full sleep, stared anyway. They had learned that safety was an illusion. The radar must never stop turning until the war itself stopped. What had begun as a desperate experiment, scattering small ships as electronic tripwires, had become a revelation. The Combat Information Center was now more important than the bridge, the man at the radar scope more vital than the lookout in the crow's nest. For the first time in naval history, information had outranked armor. The ocean itself had turned into a grid of energy, radio waves, radar beams, and invisible logic. On May 4th, even before Okinawa's fall, new waves had struck the picket line. USS Morrison and USS Louise were hit and sunk within minutes. Morrison took 4 planes before disappearing in a rolling fireball. 152 men went down with her. The destroyer's radars had tracked every incoming aircraft flawlessly, yet mathematics had its limit. When 40 planes attacked one ship, probability became destiny. The sea accepted them as it had the others, swiftly, without ceremony. In August, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Admiral Mato-Mogaki prepared his own final sortie. He gathered 11 pilots of the 5th Air Fleet and led them toward Okinawa, the last kamikaze mission of the war. None returned. Before takeoff, he wrote in his diary, "The American radar pickets have built an invisible wall. We crash against it like birds against glass. We see the target but cannot reach it. Technology has defeated spirit." His words became the war's eulogy. USS Laffey survived the war, battered but proud. She was repaired, recommissioned, and served for 3 decades more before becoming a museum ship. Visitors today walk her steel decks and still see the dents where bombs struck, the twisted gun mounts that fired until they melted. Beneath her radar antenna, a small plaque reads, "The ship that would not die." It is not a boast. It is a statement of endurance, of men who fused courage with circuitry. From the wrecks off Okinawa emerged a new truth. Wars would no longer be won by the side with the bravest warriors, but by those with the best data. Radar, once a tool, had become a weapon, an amplifier of awareness. Future conflicts would be fought not for ground but for information, not with armor but with algorithms. In 1945, sailors learned that electrons could save lives as surely as armor could stop shells. Beneath the Pacific lie the hulks of the radar pickets, silent among corals and silt. Their radars are long dark, their crews long gone, but their legacy hums through every modern warship that still scans the horizon. Each sonar ping, each radar sweep, each guided missile owes something to those destroyers that once stood alone between the fleet and annihilation. Their ghosts are made of static, endless, watchful, eternal. Commander Becton of the Laffey later said, "We proved that wars will be won not by the boldest hearts, but by the keenest minds." The technician had replaced the warrior. Radar men, radio operators, mathematicians, they had become the new front line. In their glowing rooms, surrounded by humming circuits, they glimpsed the future. A future where victory would belong to whoever could think, calculate, and act faster than death. And so the story ends where it began. In a dark room lit by a single circular screen, its sweep tracing arcs of light over an empty sea. That silent motion, once the heartbeat of the Pacific War, has become the pulse of every modern command center. The radar picket destroyers of Okinawa did more than defend a fleet. They revealed the shape of wars yet to come, wars of signals, sensors, and minds. From their sacrifice rose the age of electronic warfare, an age born from courage, perfected by mathematics, and remembered in the glow of radar light.